finally, this week, we come to when liturgy turns lethal. And if you have not been following this story, I really urge you to do so, because I do think this is maybe the single most interesting Catholic story percolating on the global stage right now. It is centered in India, specifically in southern India, within the Syro-Malabar Catholic Church. That is the second largest of the 23 Eastern churches in communion with Rome. So the largest, of course, is the Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine, which in Ukraine and worldwide has a following of about 6 million. The Syro-Malabar Church in India and elsewhere has a following of about 4.5 million. And to put that in context for you, that is basically the Catholic population of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles in the United States. So one of the largest archdioceses in the world, okay? So it is by no means trivial, okay? 4.5 million people. In 2021, the leadership of the Syro-Malabar Church in their synod, which is unlike Pope Francis's version of a synod, right? Which is bishops and priests and nuns and lay people and cats and dogs and, you know, everybody. In the Eastern tradition, a synod is composed entirely of bishops, right? So the synod of the Syro-Malabar Church, meaning its bishops, in 2021 made a decision to adopt a uniform mode of celebrating the Mass in the Syro-Malabar Rite. And basically, this uniform mode involves the priest at certain points during the Mass facing the altar, and at other points during the Mass facing the congregation. Now, this was a return to the earlier custom in the Syro-Malabar Church, and therefore a break with what had become the practice since the Second Vatican Council in the mid-1960s of the priest facing the congregation throughout the liturgy, okay? And that uniform system ran into significant opposition from certain elements of the Syro-Malabar Church. It's concentrated largely in the largest eparchy of the Syro-Malabar Church. And you know what? I spent 20 minutes this morning trying to memorize the name of this place, and I am utterly blanking on it. You can find this in articles on the Crux site. Eclonum Algamy, I think, something like that. But in any event, it is the largest archeparchy of the Syro-Malabar Church. It's located in southern India. And many of the clergy and laity in this archeparchy, who see themselves not unjustly as the heart of the Syro-Malabar Church, because something like at least half of its membership is located in this one archeparchy. So they have risen up en masse, if you will pardon the pun, to resist these liturgical changes. Now look, folks, when I first started covering the Catholic Church in the 1990s, we had back then what we called Liturgy Wars in the United States, right? I mean, people were arguing over whether where the tabernacle ought to be placed in church. Does it have to be right behind the altar, or can it be someplace else? And what does that say about the Eucharistic faith of this place? We also argued over liturgical translation. You remember this? Like, you know, when we decided to change the words at the Mass, for instance, from the Lord be with you and also with you to the Lord be with you and with your spirit. And you remember, you know, how nuts some people went about all of this. But here's the thing. Our version of the Liturgy Wars involved, contentious op-ed pieces in Catholic journals and nasty comments on blogs. You know what's going on in the Syro-Malabar Church in India? Protesters have stormed cathedrals, like the Cathedral of St. Mary's in Kochi, in Kerala State, which is basically the mothership of the Syro-Malabar Church. It has been closed for months because people will not allow this new, allegedly uniform way of celebrating the Mass to be celebrated. The news this week is that the papally appointed apostolic administrator of this archeparchy, a guy by the name of Archbishop Boshoff, has put out a 7-page decree in which he has said that the people who were opposing these liturgical changes, and I am quoting here, are guilty of fostering, subversion and hatred against ecclesiastical authority. Subversion and hatred, okay? That is strong language, right? He has said that the parish council at this basilica, which has been resisting the changes, is going to be dissolved if it doesn't fall in line. He has said that the vicar of this basilica is going to be fired if he doesn't fall into line, and he has threatened canonical sanctions against anyone else who is standing up against the decision by the Synod, the Syro-Malabar Church, to impose this liturgy. How are the people of the Archeparchy responding? Well, this past Sunday, they gathered in front of St. Mary's Cathedral, where they took a copy of Archbishop Thashath's decree and burned it publicly. Now, Thashath has set a July 2nd deadline for everyone to fall in line. The resistors have announced a massive protest gathering on July 2nd in front of the cathedral, in which they intend to defy these edicts and physically, if necessary, prevent this new form of the Mass, which they regard as an aberration and a betrayal of their traditions, from being celebrated in what they regard as their cathedral. Now, the Synod is claiming to have the Pope's backing in its efforts to ram through this new approach, but to date, Francis has not yet directly addressed this controversy. It's going to be very interesting to see going forward exactly how he's going to handle this, right? Because on the one hand, he extols synodality all the time, and here he has a synod that has made a decision which people are defying. On the other hand, his version of synodality isn't theirs, right? It's not just the bishops, but it's also, religious, and it's the people of God. It's ordinary lay people. And many of those religious and ordinary lay people, at least in this one jurisdiction, are saying, no way, Jose. So it's going to be really interesting to see if, when, and how Pope Francis decides to weigh into this controversy. In the meantime, folks, this is the closest thing in contemporary Catholic experience to those moments in the 4th century, in the run-up to the Council of Nicaea, where you actually had riots in the streets over whether Christ was fully God and fully man, as Orthodoxy insisted, or whether, as the Arians demanded, he was somehow subordinate to the Father. Back then, these weren't just things that pointy-headed theologians argued over in learned journals. It was the grist of popular life in the streets, because people were all in. And if you want a place in the world where you still have that level of passion, however misguided, and however unfortunately explosive it may be, if you want to see a place where people are willing to bleed and die for their vision of the liturgy, look no further than India's Syro-Malabar Church. All right, that is our show for this week.